for Bennelong.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I thank the member for Curtin for bringing this important matter of public importance to parliament today and to provide us all with the opportunity to talk about the significant tax reform that our government has undertaken in our 2 short years in office. Unlike the former government, we recognise the importance of reform, but also reform to make our tax system better. As members would be aware, we have clear stated priorities on tax reform. We've said we want to make super concessions fairer and more accessible. We want to ensure that multinational corporations contribute their rightful share to our tax system. We have reformed the petroleum resource rent tax, projected to increase tax receipts by $2.4 billion. We have enhanced tax compliance measures, which Treasury estimates will bring $9.1 billion back into the tax system. And we've also ensured that build-to-rent housing has become an infrastructure asset class, reducing the tax rate from 30% to 15% to encourage the construction of rental homes to help ease the housing crisis. We've also nearly doubled the capital works tax deduction depreciation rate for build-to-rent projects from 2.5% to 4%, again to boost housing supply. And we've also used the tax system to incentivise small businesses to invest in renewable energy with a 20% bonus tax deduction for investments of up to $100,000 for investments on battery storage, solar power and energy-efficient appliances. And as noted by members before me, on the government side, we've introduced tax reform to reduce the cost of zero-emissions vehicles. So to the member for Curtin and others who have spoken today on this matter, I'd say that in less than 2 short years, that's pretty significant tax reform. But, of course, there's one more. And it's a pretty big reform, Deputy Speaker. Few people have been talking about it. Introduced this week in this parliament, we have legislation to reform the tax system to implement Labor's cost of living tax cuts from 1 July. These fairer, better cost of living tax cuts, aimed squarely at Middle Australia, represent yet another piece of tax reform that this government has put before this parliament. And I take umbrage with those who say that these cost of living tax cuts aren't just tinkering around the edges, because they're not. Because the reality is that if this legislation doesn't pass, from 1 July we were set to see the end of the progressive income tax system. From 1 July, if this legislation isn't passed, someone who earns $45,000 would pay the same tax rate as someone on $200,000. So this is the reality, unless this legislation goes through. So to imply that the Labor's tax changes aren't reform is an incorrect characterisation of what is currently law in this country. Our tax reforms will address bracket creep by adjusting income brackets up the scale, the first change to some brackets since the last time Labor was in power in 2008. And importantly, they will deliver a tax cut to every single taxpayer in a fairer and more progressive way. And we're doing this because Australians have asked us for help. Australians have asked us to do better, and we are. And since I came to this place in May 22, I've had countless conversations with constituents across my electorate of Bennelong about Scott Morrison's Stage 3 tax cuts. Broadly, they consistently wanted the government to re-examine them, to ensure that they met the needs of the Australian people. People like Rosalind from Macquarie Park, who told me that even though she and her husband were set to benefit from Scott Morrison's tax cuts, that she would rather see that money to go towards people who need it more. Like Alan from—
Are you calling a point of order? On what grounds?
Point of order, just referring to—
On what grounds? What is the point of order?
That's what I'm about to tell you. The point of order, Deputy Speaker, is using members' names and correct title. Twice the member opposite has referred to the member for Cook incorrectly.
I do remind all members of the House to use correct titles when referring to any members.
Do that, Deputy Speaker. Look, at the end of the day, people in Bennelong expect a fair and progressive tax system, one that was desperate for reform, and this legislation before Parliament is significant reform. It will give every Australian a tax cut. It will make 90% of women will be better off. 98% of young people will be better off, and that is significant reform for this nation.